I was only taught the bad things about sex. I was only taught about, my mom had this book, like the STDs, and like from a religious perspective, it was like, if you do this before you're married, you're going to hell. Right. You're gonna get pregnant before, like there was nothing positive that I was taught about sex. And with my first experience sharing my body with someone being assault, my framework for what intimacy and sex was supposed to be was completely jaded. So it took me years to unlearn that.
I scheduled my first therapy appointment in years, but this is specific to sexual trauma therapy.
I decided to document my 6-month journey through sexual trauma therapy. And over the last few months, I've had conversations with therapists and educators and activists about this entire world of a topic.
When we are experiencing traumatic events, our brain has these defensive mechanisms that shift overall brain functioning into a whole different mode.
Many times it can even mimic for someone internally, neurobiologically, even like drowning.
That's what's really frustrating for me as a sexual trauma specialist, that how many clients I work with that guilt themselves out of seeking help.
For me, I didn't know until years after my assault happened that I had even been assaulted. And it took understanding what assault and trauma was for me to actually recognize what had happened. It's incredible to me that I've already seen a difference, a shift in how I speak about my trauma.
If you look, there's a part here that if I were to make a scene, what would happen?
Yeah.
So this is a fear response. That's my comment. Because sometimes we ask ourselves questions knowing the answer, but your subconscious mind doesn't have enough time to process that. And that's what therapy is about.
What is missing from sex ed?
Sex ed.
There's nothing wrong with talking about pleasure. We don't have to be explicit when we're talking about pleasure. Yeah. But
even just saying, this should feel good.
Yeah.
Sex is a very healthy thing, as opposed to feeding people all the undesirable things or the things that are going to be bad about it. Why are we not equipping them with the information that they need?
To reclaim your body in ways that are completely consensual for you, you're really doing things naturally to like grow those neural pathways.
My goal with this film is for people to learn about sexual assault and trauma and healing while watching somebody heal in real time.
Hello, welcome to the screening discussion for Unlearning Sex. I'm Lex Curtis, assistant producer of the Chicago Southside Film Festival. We're joined by Zanah Thirus, the director, producer extraordinaire, and subject of our documentary, Unlearning Sex, and Anisha Cooper, a therapist and who specializes in sexual trauma therapy. Would each of you ladies like to give like a brief introduction about yourselves? Let's start with Zanah.
Sure. I'm Zanah. I'm the producer, director, and subject of Unlearning Sex, and Chicago-based filmmaker. Yeah, you pretty much covered it, Lex. Like, that's what I do.
Perfect.
I was just going to say the same thing. Anisha Cooper, sexual trauma specialist. I'm the owner of Wishing Well ATL, and I focus on helping clients in their recovery.
Perfect. So to jump in, the first question I have for Zanah is, what was your process for deciding to create this film? How did you kind of begin this journey that we sort of see throughout the film?
Yeah.
It was interesting because I didn't really set out to make this film. It just kind of happened. There had been so much discussion, especially with the resurgence of the Me Too movement, and a lot of discussions around sexual trauma and assault. And it took me a while to even realize that the first experience that I had with sharing my body was assault. And once I identified that, I realized, oh, well, if this experience wasn't consensual, then there's other subsequent experiences that I've had that also weren't consensual, and I need help. So that's when I decided to just seek help. I had gone to therapy before, but it was not specific to sexual trauma therapy. It was just general therapy. This, I wanted to be very specific. And that's when I found Anisha, who specialized in sexual trauma therapy. And a huge part of it was narrative. And so documenting not just what my experiences were, but learning how to change the language in which I talked about these experiences, and given the tools to cope with and heal from and move through. And me being a filmmaker, naturally, I just document everything, but I really wanted to document for the sake of being able to go back for my homework assignments. When I had gone to therapy before, it was really frustrating when I was like, oh, my therapist said something, but I don't remember what it was. And so I wanted to have a reference point. And through the homework assignments and having the recordings, I realized how much I had changed over a really short amount of time. And so after the 6 months is when I wanted to gather therapists together and educators together to talk more about this subject. And I just kind of cut that all together with intercut. And that's how the film happened. There's so much that I did not share. This is a very small portion of it. I just pulled the pieces that I felt like were very poignant and worked well with the interviews. But the process just kind of happened. This was literally last year, a year ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for Anisha, for people who aren't familiar, I didn't know that there was a specialty for sexual trauma therapy. So can you give a little more information on what that looks like for people who are not, Zanah in the film?
Oh, yes. So sexual trauma specialists, what we do is a very specific type of trauma treatment. And some people use narrative exposure, some people use cognitive behavioral, whatever the modality is. Typically, sexual trauma specialists aren't shy about putting that somewhere on whatever medium that someone might find them. They're going to tell you that they specialize in this form of treatment. And so what you want to look for is any type of trauma specialty, and then kind of peruse their biography to see if they're specifying sexual trauma treatment, because some trauma specialists might specialize in domestic violence or other types of sexual abuse, like child molestation. And it just depends on what you're looking for. And as long as you're actually looking through their biographies, then you should be able to find that specialty area.
Okay. And just to follow up on that answer, what would you recommend for people looking for that kind of help who may not have access or insurance? What are some good resources for them to start getting that kind of help?
Talkspace is a really good one, but I also really love Open Path Collective. Open Path Collective is a website that they cap services at a certain amount depending on your area, and clinicians in that area have agreed to be paid at a lower cost because they're getting their services through this medium. And so Open Path Collective is the one that I typically tell people if they don't have insurance and access. And I also encourage people to do something that speaks to them. What areas of relief do they have? For Zanah, it's been filmmaking. Some people, it might be poetry. Some people go to art. But it's important to be intentional. And when you're not intentional about using that space for relief, then you might not realize that how therapeutic it is for you.
Makes sense. So back to Zanah, what was the experience like being both the subject and the director? And would you want to be on both sides of the camera again for future projects?
So to the first question, what was it like? This is my 14th film that I've done.
Wow.
So this isn't my first rodeo in general. And I got into filmmaking by way of acting. So there's been plenty of films, just even short films, where I am also the subject, but also the director of it. This isn't the first time. This is the most vulnerable and the most personal project that I've done. Because again, it wasn't intended to be in front of the world at some point. So this was, I think the toughest part was deciding what I was willing to share and what I wasn't. Like I said, there's so much. There's hours of footage and hours of therapy that I just was not willing to share. But having to sort that out and see what, I think I would be comfortable with sharing, but also would be beneficial to people who are looking for some type of inspiration to heal, and what would be most relevant and poignant with the interviews that I got with the trauma specialists and with the educators as well. So I think that was the toughest part, was just deciding how much of me I was willing to share. And I don't remember your second question. I feel like
would you be on both sides of the camera again?
Yeah, I would. I don't know ever for this personal of a documentary. But I've done it before. This isn't my first time doing it, so I'm sure sometime down the line it'll happen.
Okay, well that is a very brave process that you undertook. So very inspiring, both, just as a person, but also as a filmmaker. So my next question is, like, what have you learned from the process of making this film that you would want to carry into like your future projects?
I think logistics wise, it's really important to have a script supervisor when you are a documentary filmmaker. Especially if it's a very personal project, you feel like everything is needed, when it's like, no, actually this was repetitive, or we can cut this down, or we don't necessarily need that. It's having somebody who's not as close to the project in that role is very important. Also with, again, logistics with documentary filmmaking, I start off all of my documentaries with decks, usually about 50 to 60 pages, but it outlines your log line, your synopsis, your goal for the film, your audience, people that you want to include in the film, B-roll shot list. Like, it's literally everything. And that can change throughout your process. And oftentimes with documentary it does, but I do a lot of educational documentaries that are interview based. That are topic based. So it's easier to track that way. But I always start off with a deck that kind of outlines everything, and then filling in the pieces from there. A lot of people think that documentary filmmaking is just picking up a camera and just kind of going for it. That's not the case. Once I had gone through 6 months of trauma therapy and I realized that I wanted this to be a thing, that's when I put together the deck with what I wanted to cover, who I wanted to include, all of that. And that really helped keep me on track as well. So it's okay to be organized, even if you are a documentary filmmaker. A lot of times takes away from the art, but I'm like, yeah, but
chaos takes away from it too.
Yeah. So that's definitely, process is something that I would, logistics wise would take from this. And then, creatively, and personally, I'm an advocate for making films with your friends. My film friends, my film tribe, as I call them, help me put this together. They're people that I know in Chicago and the Atlanta filmmaking community who support me, and I support them. And I felt really safe, bringing them into this very personal project of mine because they were my friends. So, it's okay to make films with your friends too. So that's what I take into my next projects.
Oh, that's great. And so that kind of also leads into my next question, which was like the resources and financing for making the film. How did that look and come together? I know you're the financing guru.
Am I?
You are the micro budget financing wizard. Yes.
Well, that's the thing, micro budget. I'm not the financing guru. I couldn't tell you where to get financing. I don't know. I really don't know. I work a full-time job, and outside of that full-time job, I make films. And I self-fund a lot of my projects most of them on a micro budget scale because I don't have an exorbitant amount of money. So this film was done for a total of about $1,200 altogether.
Wow.
And it's because I have, again, an incredible team of filmmakers who collaborated and volunteered their resources, their locations, their camera gear. I edited the film. I edit a lot of my projects. Editing is usually a very costly part of the production process. And because I take that on, that makes it a lot. Yeah, and then also wearing multiple hats, not just, editing, but also being the producer and the director of it and sourcing a lot of these things. So taking on the heavy lifting is also how I was able to keep costs down for it. And lastly, knowing your audience is really, really important. I specifically wanted this film to be for survivors, but I also wanted it to be a tool for educators and for trauma therapists to use in their practices. And I was very specific on who I wanted this film to be for. And that kind of crafted how I edited the story and the type of festivals that I submitted it to and things like that.
Okay.
So not trying to get it to like Cannes and HBO, like that. Those keep costs down significantly.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think it was very successful for serving a lot of purposes for a lot of different audiences. And so next I'd like to ask Anisha, for people who are learning a lot from the way the educators and therapists like yourself and Zanah have kind of parsed these experiences that are extremely common. Some people may realize kind of after the fact that they've experienced assault just from the way it's explained differently in the film. So what would you recommend for people kind of have that like revelation as in the audience?
Yeah, definitely take a second to check in with yourself and make sure that you're breathing. And I know that can sound silly and almost antiquated sometimes. It's just, what do you mean deep breaths? Deep breaths. But when you are deep breathing, you're not going to process it the same way. And you can engage a different part of your mind, so you're not processing it and re-experiencing it, because then that's where that disconnect happens, when you overstimulate your body. And so making sure you're taking deep breaths, check in with yourself, and you get to decide how you want to move forward. A lot of survivors, especially knowing that I'm a sexual trauma therapist, they'll reach out to me on social media or all different platforms like, I have to go right now. I have to fix it. I have to do something. And the beauty about understanding and acknowledging that whatever narrative is coming up for you is that you get to choose the next steps. Unlike what happened to you, you get to choose how you move forward. And so if you choose to seek out help, then there's plenty of resources, Psychology Today, therapy for Black girls. And if you choose to do it in a different way, maybe it might be an art piece, it might be a poem, it might be reaching out to a friend, but you get to decide what your recovery looks like.
That's beautiful. I love that we get to see like the wide variety of ways that Zanah explores harming activities. And so one more question. So what is a good way to support a loved one who's a survivor of assault and being a part of their community and showing up for them?
Is this for me or is
Please, sorry, Anisha, yes.
No. Oh yeah, this is for me. Okay, I get you. I would definitely encourage you to let them tell their story. Be mindful of like interruptions or like any kind of language that's questioning their actions. Really try to steer clear of basically shaming whoever is coming to you. And a lot of times people don't even realize like, why did you go out? Or didn't I tell you not to wear that? Or these conversations that are kind of this visceral response are tied in this blaming narrative. And so if you're not quite sure how you're going to respond to things, and this is something to keep in the back of your mind, is just listen to hear and not to fix, and not to shame them, but to listen to hear them and understand them, and then support them in their choice, not forcing them into therapy, not forcing them into you know, you need to tell this person, or you need to confront your abuser. Let them tell you what they'd like to do next, and you can even be helpful, because sometimes they might not know, and letting them know their options. You know, this is where you can get help. This is what help can look like if you choose that. So just empowering them is really important. And then take care of yourself. You don't have to save anyone, because it disempowers them from saving themselves.
Oh, that's a word. Thank you. Hello. Gotta get some snaps. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
And so for handling like really personal topics and incorporating like yourself, your family, what was the experience like incorporating your family in the film? And what would you recommend for people who do want to do like deeply personal documentaries, and maybe, you know, including loved ones and family and friends?
Yeah. Well, number one, find out your why. You know, that's where I would start. This isn't the first documentary that I've done on my family. My first doc that I did surrounding my family was about my homeschool experience, because I was homeschooled until I went to college. And the clips that you saw were actually clips from me talking to my parents about what it was like going to college at 14. The conversation just kind of spiraled from there. And it was a very connect the dots moment, being able to see how they thought about things and kind of being able to put myself in their shoes as parents, from a bird's eye view, you know, while going through this therapy process. So for me, it answered a lot of questions. And they have seen the film. They are supportive of the film. My mom, it took her a very long time to watch the film. And she's finally come full circle and being like, this is actually a really good, powerful project. Also, being very upfront with them about like distribution, where this is going. Again, this film is not a film that I just want everyone to have access to. It's a film that warrants a conversation. It's a film that I want to be at social justice themed festival, and that's supposed to be for a resource. So the distributor that I work with specifically works with schools, university libraries, sex education programs, and it can be licensed to therapists as well to use for their practice. So this is an educational film, and the goal for the film is for people to use it as a resource to start their own healing journey. So again, this is not just to go out there. And once they understood that also made them really happy about the project in general and what it was for. If I was like, so going to Sundance, we're putting this everywhere, like they would be like, yeah, so we're doing, but yeah, just again, knowing your why is really important, and doing what you think will result in the safest result for you. You know, I, again, was not comfortable. There's a lot of different ways that I could have gone about this project. I wasn't comfortable putting certain things into this project. I was not comfortable naming any of my abusers or assailants. I was not comfortable putting this out there to the world, but there were some things that I was comfortable with, sharing my journey, sharing parts of my journey that I was really okay with it developing a discussion afterwards as well. Like, I think thinking about, okay, if someone saw this and they asked questions, would this be too triggering? Like that, thinking about it in that way before I put it out into the world helped influence what I did put out into the world. And so I don't even remember your question, but
you did. It was also like advice for if you do want to approach like your family or people really close to you for
yeah, knowing your why and why you want to do this film, and making sure that they're clear about that as well.
Okay. And just kind of continuing the narrative that you were already on, what has the response been when you have screened this so far?
Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been better than I could ever imagine. A lot of survivors will reach out to me afterwards and say that they've had very similar experiences, or this is the first time that they felt affirmed in their experience. And that this is something that made them rethink a lot of the experiences that they've had and seek help for that. So that's the goal of this film, really. There's also a lot of people who are educators, who are teachers, who are parents who see this film and really resonate with it. So the responses have been great. We screened at Chicago Southside Film Festival, but also North Dakota Human Rights Film Festival is another fest that's coming up. Imagine This Women's Film Festival and International Social Change Film Festival as well. So these are, again, all film festivals that have audiences of who I am trying to reach. And for that, the responses have just been great. They've been really, really affirming as well.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I've only heard good things from people who've also seen the film. It's been really great to kind of watch this. Also to have some of those difficult conversations with family, to kind of see that dynamic in the film, I think is also extremely helpful. And so for media in general, your perspective as a filmmaker, what would you like to see for like representation of like survivors in the media? Because there's plenty of stories about like assault and abuse. And yeah, so I want to hear both of your perspectives on like what's out there, what you've seen out there, and what you would like to see. So we can start with Zanah.
I would like to. I'll say this. I'm loving the fact that the conversations are becoming normalized. I'm loving the fact that survivors are now taking the reins and being like, I'm telling my own story in the way in which I'm comfortable telling it. And I'm loving seeing survivors also be like writers and directors and kind of in telling your own stories in that way. I want to continue to see more of healing. I think that hear a lot about the trauma, and a lot of people can relate to a lot of the trauma, but we don't necessarily get to see what healing can look like. And that was the purpose of my film. I wanted it to come full circle. I wanted people to see me actually starting my healing journey. And I personally would love to see more of that. I think that we have a lot of trauma that's being broadcasted, and especially for Black women and Black femmes and Black queer folk, it's important that we look at our joy and our healing as resistance as well, that's also part of the revolution. And I think that I want to see more of that. I want to definitely see more healing when it comes to stories of survivors.
Yeah, and to add to you, the healing process for different different religious backgrounds, I think is really important. And so working with especially Black women from African descent, like first generation, what it looks like to have people in power. You know, it might be a church member. Sexual assault is not even defined in the community on top of this layer of power. And so because these narratives are so common because of my job title, I would really love to see the healing process for them, because there's so many different places of freedom that we have in healing here, and then you go back home for some of these clients and that's not a reality. And so I would love to see that healing process. I'd love to see also different kinds of women. You know, Zanah mentioned queer women. Zanah mentioned trans women. Sexual assault is highest with Black women, and then even within the demographic is trans women. And so I think it's important to have these different kinds of narratives with diversity. And that's why I love the film so much, is because I didn't have a say in how Zanah, you know, shared her narrative. But seeing it, I was just so proud that someone who operates in some ways of privilege chose to include these people in your narrative. Make sure that you're talking to different kinds of people, and I think that's beautiful. So I would love to see more films like Zanah's, I guess.
Agreed. Always agreed. And so sort of, I guess the opposite end of the spectrum, what would you both like to see for the way, like, particularly Black women's experiences with like sex and sexuality? I like that you touched on like the toy and self-love and pleasure, and the fact that pleasure is like almost No, it is significantly more stigmatized and like types of predatory or oppressive interactions. So what would you both like to see more of, as far as like the way sex and sensuality and sexual experiences are represented? Zanah?
I want to see it normalized. I want to see it normalized. I say this all the time. Like, I have so many sex toys now, and like I was not like this for this film, and that's okay. You know, like that's okay. Like that's a huge part of the discussion too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was so nuanced because with my first assault, it involved pleasure, and I was not able to recognize it as such because of that. And there was a lot of reworking that I had to learn to do to retrain my mind and my body to associate pleasure with something that was consensual. And I had never even registered that that was going to be a part of the healing process. But it's also now a part of just me.
Good life, yeah.
Like pleasure and toys and all of that is important. That's important, and it's part of your humanity. You know, like that. And I want it to be as normal as talking about like hair conditioner or like coffee. Like I don't want it to be like this thing that's like, oh wait, we can't talk about, like, no, like we can sit and we can talk about vibrators if we want to because it's normal. I just want it to be normal. I don't want it to be a thing, you know? That's what I want.
Yeah. I mean, I really want the same thing. I think the different kinds of pleasure is so important too. And the more that people understand that, you know, pleasure isn't isolated to one area of your body. There's all kinds of ways to pleasure yourself and to allow someone else to experience that with you. And so sexual freedom is part of the healing process that I teach clients. And I think unfortunately, I don't see that often. I'll have people come in again and again saying, you know, I've been working with a therapist for years now, and I don't know why I can't have an orgasm with my partner. And I just think it's really important. And that's why the resources of even including sexologists in your treatment, referrals, there's so many different ways to help people get past that. And I think narrating that on screen is important too. Like, what does that healing look like when you can't enjoy something that you're curious about?
Yeah. Okay, and so I see a question for Anisha. Do you ever advise your clients to leave church or organized religion to hasten their healing?
Whew, that's loaded. I can't tell a client what to do. Like personally, I would love to tell a client to leave something that's so harmful to their healing. But like I said earlier, it's important that I'm not the voice for my client. At the end of the day, I want them to form their own voice. And so I don't encourage them to leave, but I do ask, you know, what are the benefits of staying in this relationship with this church? I want to understand that, you know, just like the client is trying to convey to me, everything isn't all good or all bad. And maybe there's something there that they're getting healing from, but where else can they get it where they don't have to compromise all these other pieces? And so I try to give them options more than anything, even though that's the hardest part about therapy is, you know, leaving your personal feelings at the door and helping your client seek healing for themselves. So.
And so that leads into my next question, like about the stigma that you deal with, or just kind of here out in the world. Like, what are some of the biggest obstacles or misconceptions that you come across when it comes to people seeking therapy or just thoughts about therapy treatment in general?
A lot of people think, is this for me? This is still for me.
Yeah, sorry, Anisha. Yes.
You're fine. A lot of people don't realize that therapy doesn't have to look like traditional, where it's I sit here, you sit there, let's just talk it out. You know, I have clients where we do walking therapy. We do, I've had therapy in restaurant. What does it feel like to have an emotional response in a restaurant? Because these are real life things. Your life isn't confined to the therapy room. And so one of the things I try to encourage, especially Black folks, is that therapy doesn't have to look like you might think it has to look, and you can be vocal and advocate for things that you need in a therapy session. I really pride myself on customizing treatment for the people I'm interacting with. So yes, I'm a sexual trauma specialist, but my 9 o'clock doesn't look like my 10 o'clock. And that's on purpose and that's intentional. So I think I pulled a Zanah. Zanah, I don't know what the question was anymore, but I hope I answered it.
Well, yeah, just the ideas that people have in their head before they actually get to the point of like finding someone and booking an appointment.
This is what a therapist looks like. Like your therapist doesn't always, have to be even the traditional form of professionalism. And so, and I'm small, so people come. I should be happy, but I'm small. So when people come into the space, sometimes they're like, "Oh, you sound a lot bigger than you look." And so therapists can be short too. That's also a thing. I'm 5'1.5". So yeah, I want people to understand, like, we're human beings. You might see me at the bar on a Saturday. You might see me at a strip club on a Friday night. It just depends. And it's okay that we're human.
Mm-hmm. And for Zanah, you talked about like different experiences with therapy. How did you know like Anisha was the one? Like, what were some of your previous experiences like? And what were you looking for, when you came across her and like that light bulb kind of clicked?
Yeah. Well, I had one previous experience with a therapist. It was a white man. And again, it just did not, the positive was that this was the first time that I was able to just talk, and actually express what I was feeling, but I wasn't aware that I was a survivor of sexual trauma. It wasn't specified in that way. It was just literally me going to an office and like crying about my day. Like it did not really do anything for me. Since I realized that I needed sexual trauma therapy, I literally just went to Google and like the first one that popped up, and I like read her bio, and I was like, yep. And she got back to me like the next day or like 2 days later, and we had a really great phone conversation. The first thing that I have recording myself was actually shortly after our like intake call. Mm-hmm. It was very, every single question I had, it put my mind at ease about the process in general, because it was daunting. It was very, very daunting to be like, okay, I'm going to actually seek help for sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. This is a lot, but right away I was like, okay, I'm in good hands. She knows what she's doing. This isn't a white guy. But like, this is like, I feel very confident about this. And she was very honest in that, like, this is not going to be easy. This is not a process. There are going to be days where you have peaks, and there are going to be times where you have valleys. There are going to be days that are extremely triggering, and there are going to be days where you feel like this process is like, oh, this is great. This is, the best thing that ever happened. So not to expect a certain route, but really just to take the journey. So it was, yeah. I was pretty confident after our first phone call.
I've never heard this story, so this was just very intimate for me. I was like, what happened? How did it? So thank you for sharing.
Of course.
And on the flip side for Anisha, my next question is going to be like, what should people look for? So when you do get to the point of a list of names, like what should you look for each person you speak to for figuring out who is a good fit to be your therapist?
Definitely, just looking at their background, what do they actually enjoy doing? There's a difference between being able to and actually enjoying it. And I think that depending on, how committed they are to that craft, you're going to get a different experience. And it's also important to kind of gauge, can you actually see yourself talking to them? Do you see yourself talking to them, and then when you actually are talking about the presenting problem, the thing that you're actually seeking therapy for, are you filtering? Do you find yourself not wanting to mention parts of it? And I encourage clients to visualize talking to the person, whoever it is, because sometimes people call me and they're just like, oh my God. And I'll have a consultation in the moment, and I realize, okay, I'm not the perfect therapist for them, this person will be a better fit. And it's because they're fleshing out those ideas about what they want to see when they start being vulnerable. Do you want to look at someone that looks like you? Do you want to look at someone that doesn't look like you? You want to have a motherly feel? You want to have a peer feel? There's all these different emotions to consider when you're looking at that person. And then do the thing that Zanah did, where she's going to schedule a consultation, which is typically not a charge to you, typically. And you get to actually talk to that therapist for 15 to 20 minutes and see how does it feel to talk to them in that moment without commitment.
Good words to live by. I'm taking mental notes. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so we talked about things getting normalized, like conversations about assault, you know, kind of culturally being brought to the foreground. And so that also means like outing abusers. So one of my questions that I had for Anisha as well was, what community response would you like to see when someone you know is outed as being an abuser?
It's so complicated. But my main thing for people to consider is, before you cancel a person, think about what systems are in place that let that person live in anonymity for that long. What systems of power are in place, and how can we cancel that instead of people? And I know that's also controversial for sexual trauma therapists to say, but it's important that we hold people accountable for their actions. By no means am I denying that. But that person is just a representative of a bigger issue. And if we continue to, write those people off who are trying to be accountable, don't get me wrong. If you're not trying to be accountable, I'm done too. I'm done. So how do you work with someone where there's power structures at play that allow them to remain anonymous, that allow them to remain unaccountable? And how do we attack those systems and not those people? We want to attack the people that are in the systems in a way that we can get what we need from that, and hold people to higher standards when it comes to respecting Black women and their bodies. So there's that.
And I have a question for Zanah. You chose not to name your abusers in the process of the film. What do you think of people who do choose to out them publicly, like in film or on social media?
It's completely up to the survivor. Like 100%, every single instance is individual and nuanced. And so I'll never say that there is a right or a wrong response. If the in any type of restorative justice or accountability, like, it's up to the survivor to decide how they want to go about their healing. I always want to put healing at the forefront, and what would, if this is something that is going to help you in your healing journey, go for it. And for me personally, I did not see this calling people out by name adding to or resulting in anything that was going to aid in my healing or take away from that. So I chose not to. Again, because my focus was healing. And so anybody who chooses to, I would just encourage them to ask themselves from that perspective, is this going to help you on your healing journey? Are we centering the survivor in this? Is this what they want to do? If so, then go for it.
And turning towards the future, what projects are you working on now, and what do you want to do next?
Yeah, so I am in animation for my first animated film and my first comedy, which I'm really
wow.
Yes, I just got a grant for my first comedy film, and it's the whole budget because I'm a micro budget filmmaker, so I'm very excited about that. It's called The Love You Want Exists, and it is about a couple trying to plan a commitment ceremony that is completely free of any patriarchal traditions. And their family and their friends are super confused. I tell people it's like The Office meets Dear White People. We have a lot of really great improv actors that are going to be a part of it. It's really funny. And the team that I have is phenomenal. So I'm really, really excited about that. We're filming starting February 2021. So, yeah.
And so as a filmmaker who has so many films under her belt at such a young age, how has like the pandemic and everything kind of changed your approach to filmmaking for like your next couple projects?
Well, definitely me being a micro budget filmmaker, we only have one hurdle to get over. It's really just the safety. Because I think the pandemic has shown people not everything needs to be a blockbuster. You know, you don't need 50 people on set. You don't need 20 locations. Like, we can do smaller scale projects and still get the point across, or still make amazing films on a smaller scale, because this pandemic has forced us to do so. Independent micro budget filmmakers, we're doing that anyway. So it's not like we had to adapt.
Right.
We have to now, you know, instead of for example, like catering on set, buffets are out. Now for film, I'm giving my team each gift cards to go get their lunch separately, and we don't have that on set. There's specifically a budget set aside to like sanitation and cleaning, and for like walking in and coming out, and where to leave your shoes, and just it's very it's really centered around safety in the pandemic, and everybody having to get tested before, and having the scan thermometers on set, and like things like that. And you know, my leads are actually dating in real life, because I knew that if I had a couple and they had to be in close proximity without masks, I wanted them to be doing that anyway. So there's decisions made throughout the whole process to adapt to the pandemic. But thankfully, it being small is not.
Well, that is exciting. And we talked a little bit about media representation, but for both of you, like, what are some of the like films or series that are relatively recent that kind of excite you and like caught your eye recently?
Definitely. It's on my to-do list to watch. I May Destroy You by Michaela Coel, I think her last name. Yeah. I'm definitely excited to watch that. And I've never seen Girlfriends before, so this is my first time watching Girlfriends, and I'm in season 4. I've been binge watching it. And it's just very interesting how even after like 2 decades, the narratives have shifted so much, and I'm really glad. I'm really glad that, you know, I'm writing a comedy that's a rom-com, and it's the complete opposite of what we've seen. Because I feel like the media loves broken Black women that are like looking for completion. They could have everything in the world, but they're looking for completion, and they're looking for that in someone. And I think that it's going to be really, what I'm really inspired by is having a story that I'm creating where the lead character is not looking to be completed by anyone else. They're a fully autonomous human being who happens to meet someone who shares their same values, and their ceremony is reflective of their union and their partnership. It's, again, like, Girlfriends has been such an inspiration for that, because I'm just like, this is what I don't want to do. Like, this is what I don't want to include. Like, this is just, yeah. So Girlfriends and I May Destroy You are my like things right now.
And Anisha?
I'm really loving P-Valley.
Yes.
I'm loving it. I was like, is this like oh my gosh, are they showing all the different stigmas like in one space, and then they're just crossing all the boundaries and making it normal for people just to be who they are? And I think like that's what's so beautiful about P-Valley. Like, I love the narrative, I love the storytelling. I don't want to give away too much for anyone who hasn't watched it, but I appreciate that they're telling all these stories about Black people in the same setting. Like, they're smart and they're resourceful, and there's a small business owner who's just trying to pay her people. It's just a lot of different stories.
Relatable content.
I'm like, if you can't see it, then you're going to miss it. You're just going to miss it.
Agreed. And my final question is, how can we find you, connect with you, support your future work?
My website has everything. Should I put it in the comments?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind.
I don't know if I can type. I see the private chat. I don't know if I could put.
I think I can copy and paste from there.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. I'll put here. My website literally has everything. My social. If you want to choose a social media platform to follow me on, it's Twitter. Definitely follow me on Twitter. It's a wild time on Twitter.
It is.
Yeah, Twitter's wild. Twitter's so fun. Follow me on Twitter. And listen to my podcast. If there's independent filmmakers out there, I have a podcast called the Micro Budget Indie Filmmakers Podcast. And I walk filmmakers through my entire production process from script to screen. And each season comes with workbooks because I'm a nerd.
No, it's amazing.
Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But yeah.
Brilliant.
I'm so proud. Oh, gosh.
And Anisha, for anyone who wants to reach out to you, either professionally or do you have any like social presence that people can tap into?
At hangin_w_coop, and I'll put it in here. But that's my Instagram, and that's you know, a homage to Hanging with Mr. Cooper. That was one of my favorite shows in the day. And I'm Mrs. Cooper, so why not? So yeah, that's my social. And then the wishingwellatl.com is my professional website. If you're looking for a resource, actually I'm updating it, but check back at maybe tomorrow night, where the resources tab will be up there.
And you said that's the wishingwell.com?
The wishingwellatl.com.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we'll be sure to add that to the comments as well for anyone who wants to find you. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in to the Chicago Southside Film Festival live panel for Unlearning Sex. We are a not-for-profit founded in 2017. For those who don't know, there's over 100 film festivals in the Chicago area alone, and we were the first and only in 2017 dedicated to the South Side and prioritizing South Side filmmakers. We serve, you know, a relatively marginalized, under-resourced community, so it's really important to, you know, be able to support all the talent like Zanah. Like wonderful Zanah, and we have 16 other fantastic filmmakers and their films in the rest of the festival. So for anyone who wants to continue to support SouthsideFilmFest.org, we have 4 more screenings and 4 more panels coming up throughout the rest of the festival. So thank you so much for joining us, ladies. Thank you to everyone who's watched and tuned in. We have one more live panel today at 6:30 Central for Coming of Age and Legacy Shorts Block. So everyone have a good Saturday.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.